Thank you very much, and it is my pleasure and my privilege to welcome you all to the second session of the OGTC conference. May I request everybody's focus on here, please? Thank you. As always, my congratulations to Tony Uppal, Mr. Kesar and Mr. Mehra and the whole team at OGTC, the whole OGTC family, for organizing yet another annual conference, which has become one of those must-go-to on the apparel calendar, particularly for us manufacturer exporters in North India. I must confess, full disclosure, that I'm a member of OGTC and I'm what I call an insider-outsider. I don't get to spend as much time in the monthly meetings as I'd like to, but whatever time I spend and whatever my interaction with OGTC is, shows work of a very, very high order, which so many of us and so many associations all over India can learn from, in terms of the information sharing, the WhatsApp group, the project teams across different manufacturing organizations who normally, in a sense, may be competing with each other. But OGTC defines a way of doing things in terms of experience and knowledge sharing, which I've seen very, very few other associations do. So Tony, Mr. Kesar, Mr. Mehra, may your tribe increase, and great job done. Yeah. In fact, let's have a round of applause for all of them. Now that I've assured my lunch, let's go to the subject at hand. I truly believe that the world is on the cusp of a historic shift in sourcing today. Sourcing over the years has become largely focused around Asia and in the Asian countries. And if you look at the numbers, and if you try to do some crystal ball gazing for the future, there is some very interesting patterns which emerge. China last year did a turnover of $174 billion in apparel exports. And if you take the next three big Asian manufacturers, Bangladesh with about 28 billion, Vietnam with about 23 billion, and India, unfortunately, fourth position with about $18 billion. And if you aggregate the export turnover of Bangladesh, Vietnam, and India, and multiply the resultant figure by 2, you're still going to be way below what China is doing. And the writing is clearly on the wall. All our buyers tell us this. In fact, they've been telling us this for the last 2 or 3 years, but for the first time, the numbers also have begun to indicate this, that China, almost by state policy, has begun to vacate that manufacturing space in the apparel manufacturing area, almost by state policy. It's a question of when and not if that the movement becomes more pronounced. They are still trying to hold on because they've had some temporary setbacks, and therefore there's a talk of perhaps a further yuan devaluation and so forth. But it's a question of when. They may defer the inevitable for some time, but it will happen. It is already happening. And India is poised, at least on paper, to be the biggest beneficiary of this absolutely teutonic sourcing shift. It is a huge sourcing shift, because even if 5% business shifts away from China, you can imagine India won't even have the capacity to handle that kind of business, given the situation in our factories today. There's an old saying that the biggest opportunities in the world come disguised as insoluble problems, and this is one such huge opportunity. Because if you talk to the average apparel exporter, perhaps sitting in this room, including myself, we will tell you about how buyers have shifted so much to the apparel manufacturer. Design, product development, program management, of course manufacturing. They want everything from you or from us, but they want it at their price. And that their price is often dictated by the common denominator of price they receive from the other sourcing countries around the world, who may be operating at very different costing parameters or very different operational setups than what we have in India. And I think it is in that context that this second session of our OGTC conference is especially interesting. We have a wonderful panel of speakers. We are talking about subjects which are dear to the apparel manufacturer's heart, because they are so difficult to get to. Profitability. And a very, when you're talking of profitability, very simply defined, profitability is sales minus costs. There's not too much you can do on the unit price with customers today. We all want to be in a business where we can charge our price to the customer. There's a very, very few of us who can do that. Price is pretty much a given in today's world. But cost is something which you have control over. And these gentlemen today, who I will very briefly introduce, and so that we can get right onto the session, are going to advise us today on how we can handle costs to take that given in price and still come out ahead in terms of profitability. It is my pleasant duty to introduce Charles Dagger, Prashant Agarwal, and Hiroshi Tachigawa. For those of you who practice or who have tried to practice lean manufacturing, Charles Dagger is a well-known name. Charles, if I remember correctly, is based out of Sri Lanka, and he operates out of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and India. At least when I last met him, and I'm sure knowing him, he's taken his talents and his knowledge to various other countries. And lean is perhaps is something which all of us in the employment-intensive apparel business can benefit a lot out of. I don't want to second guess what Charles is going to talk about, but to the extent he's talking about cost management in world-class manufacturing, please join me all in welcoming Charles Dagger on a very, very important subject for us today.